Well, my name is Charlotte Saenz, and I'm so happy to welcome you to this webinar on the art of tea, along with my colleague, Karen Gutierrez.
Hi, welcome.
I'm going to be taking you through a series of slides to introduce an activity that you can use with your students around the art of tea. But before we do that, I'd like to just show you some of the tools in the Blackboard Collaborate interface that we're using so that you can become familiar with these different tools that we're going to be using today. So we have three main things we'll be using. One is the participant box where you see your name. You see there's four icons. One is to express your emotions, like a happy face. The other one is to show that you've left your computer. Maybe you need a break or something, just to let us know that you're not there since we can't see you. And then there's raising the hand, which I have an arrow here pointing to the raising the hand, which I will need you to raise when we watch the video, just to let me know that you're finished. So that is one of the tools. Below we have the chat box where we've already started using it, and Bronia let us know that she won't speak much because there's a lot of background noise in your house right now. That's absolutely fine. The great thing about these interactive webinars and the platform of Blackboard Collaborate is that we can choose to interact in different ways. So we have video, we have voice, and we have chat box, and we have these other tools as well. So we'll, excuse me, we'll use some of those. But for the chat box, you write your text in the bottom of the chat box, and it'll come up on the feed. And then on the right, you see the whiteboard toolbox, and it's right next to your participant box on the left side of your screen. And there's going to be two things we'll use, the text tool, which is where the little A is in the lines, and clip art, which we'll probably use as well. And we're going to try these out right away. So as a welcome warm-up, and to get to know each other just a little bit, if you can select your text tool and practice writing your name and tell us what and where you teach and what the weather is like where you are, and that can be the literal weather, what it looks like outside, or your own emotional weather, how you're feeling. So go ahead and give that a try. Great. I think we have everybody on here. We're missing Kendra, I think. Let me know if you have any troubles. It takes a while to figure this out sometimes. So let's see, we've got several 7th grade teachers in Mendocino. Wow, near Denver. Colleen is in Denver. Bronia's in Burlingame. Nice, and the weather looks good everywhere. So Kendra's just having a little trouble with the text tool. So one thing you might be doing, Kendra, that I was doing actually, is I was trying to use the bar on the screen, on the slide. Make sure you're using the bar, the text tool bar that's closest to the participant box, because I actually was doing that just now. I was doing the wrong bar because there's one that's there as a demonstration, but there's one that's the real deal. So just make sure you have the right one. I realize that can be confusing because they're right next to each other. You don't need an empty part of the grid. Go ahead and do it anywhere. This grid is just to give us a spatial guide, but you can go ahead and try it out anywhere. And don't worry if you type right on top of us. There you go, Kendra. Great. And we've got Ron also. Great. It's okay if we're on top of each other. I can move us around. Let's see. I think it's this way. Okay, so we've got Ron teaching 10th grade world history, Kendra, 7th grade world geography, and 9th grade world civilization. Wonderful. Well, welcome all of you. It's great to know who's in the room. I think we got everybody. Got Colleen? Yes. Great. If at any point you have a question, just type in the chat box and Karen or I will pick up your question. All right, we'll move on to the goals overall of this webinar series. Let's see, is this, Karen, do you want to fill us in about the goals? Make sure to press your talk button, Karen. We're not hearing you.
Is that better? Is that working?
Yes, there you go.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. The goal of these webinars is to help, hi Sarah, is to help provide strategies for teaching about medieval Japan using the Asian Art Museum's collection. And so not only do we look at the content standards, but we also look at global competencies, which is why we have been partnering with World Savvy, because they're really fabulous when it comes to that, as well as the Common Core. And you can see these goals here on your screen, but what we really hope to achieve is to bring sort of the life of the people of medieval Japan and its living legacies closer to middle school students in a very real way, and hope that they can find some relationship to their own lives. So as Charlotte mentioned, for more sort of deep content background, we have videoed talks and video webinars that you can find on our website. One is on Japan, the Standard Narrative, which is a great sort of arc of the history. And then we also have the past few webinars that we've done. One is sort of through the lens of symbols of protection, looking at the samurai and the relationship to Buddhist deities, and the other is the art of storytelling with an emphasis on the tale of the Heike. So let's see if I can go to the next slide. So these are our learning objectives for this webinar. As you can see, they sort of embody the Common Core and global competencies. And these are all detailed in your packet as well. Was everyone able to download the packet? That has a lot of the content background and these lessons outlined for you, as well as links to resources. And so if you didn't, it should have popped up right when you logged on. Great. Okay, thanks, Charlotte. Okay, good. So some are still downloading. If anybody runs into trouble, just email me and we'll make sure you can get another PDF. Okay, thanks so much.
So now we're going to practice using the clip art tool just to get a sense of where people are at with their comfort level teaching on medieval Japan, as well as on relating medieval Japan to students' lives. So you can select any of the clip art tools that you prefer and practice putting it somewhere on these bars, and let's just see where we're at as a group. someone is really fast and good at this clip art. It's already there. Great. Okay. All right, well, we've got a range on comfort level teaching on medieval Japan. It looks like we have some experienced and not so experienced, so we've got a full range. That's great. For those of you who are more experienced, we're looking forward to you sharing some of your knowledge with us. And in terms of relating it to students' lives, that is more of a challenge, so that's hopefully what we can together brainstorm on and see if these activities are helpful to us in bringing it home to the students. So thank you. This is very helpful. I just want to share with you that I have been working with an organization called World Savvy. And at World Savvy, we work on developing what we call global competencies, which together signify an overall willingness and ability to understand and act on issues of global importance. So this visual model is just to show you the way our notion of global competency envelops values and attitudes, behaviors, and skills within larger core concepts about the world we share. In your supplementary packet, there's a much more fleshed out explanation about this, but just to let you know that when I refer to global competencies, it's about a way of understanding and a way of being and acting in the world that values multiple perspectives and respects difference, including other ways of being and knowing. So we work with our teachers on developing global competence with students, teachers, and each other. And the activities that we share with you today, or the activity that we're sharing today, has been developed thinking about these notions of global competencies. So we're going to start, Karen is going to start us off with an observation exercise. So over to you, Karen.
Thanks, Charlotte. What I'd like everyone to do is just grab a pencil or pen and a blank piece of paper. In your packet, we actually have some graphic organizers included that you could use with your students for this activity, but for the sake of keeping it simple, just any piece of scratch paper is fine. And one thing we find is really important to do with students is this exercise of close reading or close looking of artwork, of what they see. It's amazing what students sort of can build based on just what they see without yet even having a lot of the background information. And so we use this as an opportunity to start building their interest and having them a place to sort of start from their own curiosity. So what I'd like you to do, this is a tea house in the Asian Art Museum, is to take 30 seconds to look closely and just write down 5 words or phrases that describe what you see. So just do that. We'll take about 30 seconds. And then don't worry if things are hard to see, because we'll go into some details in a moment. And we'll keep writing on the scratch paper. We'll share them we'll share people's observations after we do some close looking? That was a good question. You don't have to share them quite yet. So now let's look at a detail we're going to build on your observation list. This activity, again, is called Looking 5x2. It was developed by Harvard's Project Zero. And so let's look for a second time. This time we're going to focus in on the Tokonoma, which is the area on the left side of the tea room. And it would have been specially curated by the host of a tea gathering based on who the guests were. So we'll go to that. This is a little different detail, but this is a Tokonoma. You can continue to add to your list of words or phrases that describe what you see. Now we're going to move to another detail, which is the area where the host would make the tea. Continue adding to your descriptive bank. Also, if you start having questions or are starting to put together some ideas, feel free to start noting those as well. Okay, now that you have a sense of what a tea house looks like, we wanted to provide a little context by showing a short video clip so you can get a sense of the function, because one of the challenges is just seeing the tea house statically may not have a sense of what the sort of function was. So Charlotte's loading up a video from a film on Rikyu, who is a really well-known tea master who sort of informed the practices of a lot of the tea schools today.
So I'm directing this to the video, but I'm going to ask you each, because I think it will show up. Can everybody hear that?
I can hear it, but it's at the front.
It's at the front. Okay. So what we're going to try to do is scroll. Let me see if I can scroll for everybody. And Karen, you can let me know if this is working. I'm going to scroll to 1127. There we go. Is everybody seeing that? Okay.
It isn't scrolling.
It's not. Okay, then everybody will have to scroll individually, I think. Are you able to control it? Because I'm watching it at the right. Okay, yes, if you could just go to 1127 and watch till 1443. And I'll write it in the chat box. And then just raise your hand when you're finished so that I know that you're done. Okay, it looks like everybody finished watching the video, and so I'm thinking that was a successful experiment. This is like a new way of sharing videos, so thank you for being part of the experiment. I think it worked, but it was a little tricky there. Okay, so I'm just going to check to see if Karen made it back.
Yes.
Ah, she did. Okay.
I lost my screen for a moment there. Hi, Audrey. So what I'd like you to do is, this is a Seasick Wonder graphic organizer, which let me put my video on. This is a graphic organizer in an exercise called Seasick Wonder, which was also developed by Project Zero. And what I'd like you to do is in the C box, just write down some of those observations you made of both the tea house and the, any observations from the gathering that we saw from the Rikyu film. And then in the think, what did you think about what you saw? And then the wonder area, what sort of questions came up as you looked at the tea house and saw the excerpt from the Rikyu film. So use your text tool and start filling in this graphic organizer. If you want, you can play around with colors and fonts, but you don't have to. So some observations are beautiful scrolls, serene empty spaces, simple, very little furniture. Another observation is sort of simple, elegant. Oh, if your text tool isn't working, click on it a couple times. Sometimes it takes a couple clicks on the big A, or the A with the line.
And make sure you're using the left-hand toolbar that is right flush next to the participant window, because I realize it can be a little confusing that I have the sample one on the slide. So I make that mistake all the time, so just make sure that's happening.
Great. And for the people that just joined us, welcome. Right now what we're doing is we did some close looking at the tea house in the Asian Art Museum's collection and some of the details, as well as an excerpt from the film Rikyu. And right now we're writing down what people observed and then what they thought about what they saw, and questions that sort of arose and curiosities as we did some close looking or close reading. Very little talking and distractions, so you can really focus on the process, which is, one of the qualities is this idea of one time, one moment, one place, and that this experience will never be repeated again. So you're very much present and in the moment. That's one of the principles of a tea gathering. Some of the thoughts people have are about, this being a great place for meditation and reflection, and that you could spend a lot of time in this space, and definitely, this practice actually is tied and rooted in Zen Buddhism, and this place of really being with yourself and being present, coming and having tea before you went out to battle, or even its earliest uses when it was brought to Japan was Buddhist monks would drink tea because it's really caffeinated, and it would help them stay sort of focused and alert during long meditations. So this idea of it being this thought about being slow and deliberate and meaningful, it's interesting sort of balancing this idea of something that looks very ritualistic over such, and some of the principles have stayed very similar over a long period of time, However, there is also a sense of uniqueness in each event, not only in the artwork that is chosen for the audience, which you would talk about the artwork in the gathering, but that the conversations would be, very thoughtful and unique, and only about matters of things that were positive. You wouldn't talk about politics or religion or anything in the tea house. And this question about being, the thought of it being slow as being wrong or boring, that's a really good question, and a very good point about, sort of this idea of slow being boring. I think now we're seeing in slow food movements, or in art museums we do slow looking. This idea of doing things and feeling things deeply is becoming much more valued. But that's a really good question. I think that would be a good question to pose with your students, and I think it probably has to do with just building an understanding. So one question is, how often would one visit the tea room? That's a really good question. If you had a tea gathering, you could possibly have people, many days in a row. It wasn't just, at certain times of the year, and you might have even changed the artwork in the Tokonoma, for the next gathering if you had one the following day. We at the Asian Art Museum change it seasonally, because the way that the tea kettle would have been in the house based on heat, being able to heat up the space varies depending on the season. Same with the flower arrangements and the artwork. And actually today, if you're around this afternoon, 1 o'clock, we even have a tea gathering in the tea house you could see. This question about, is it a male ritual? It originally started off as a male ritual, but now everyone practices tea. It's open to everyone. But in its earliest origins, oh, did I lose my audio? Can you hear me now, Bronya? In its earliest origins, okay, it was male. Did I get everyone's questions? Oh, are there multiple tea masters in a community? Oh, really good question. The film that you saw about Rikyu, when he died, there were a series of lineages that directly sort of were inspired by his practice. So like Uro-senke, Amoto-senke. And right now, actually, there are even multiple Uro-senke schools in the Bay Area. So there are many different tea schools that grew out of this, but most tie back to Rikyu and his principles as their inspiration. But there are a variety of different tea schools, and you would often associate with one practice because there is some slight differences in gestures or utensils that you might prefer. How am I doing on time, Charlotte? Oh.
We're doing great, so take your time.
Okay, great. Then another question about creating this atmosphere in my own life. I find myself asking that as well. It's quite interesting if you come into and come see the tea room. It's very simple in some respects in terms of color, but then also detailed in other respects. The varieties of wood, everything is natural materials. in terms of constructing the tea house. And it even has a name in the fog. And so, you know, is it better? Is the audio better? So basically, coming in and good. I'm glad the audio is working. I think coming in and observing and looking at the elements of basically simplicity that then allow you to focus in on the art or on the tea, the two things that are you're intended to focus on, as well as the guests, are sort of intentional in the creation of the environment. And this idea of sort of inside outside that we also see inspiring a lot of, you know, contemporary art, from minimalism to you know, even the inside outside movements today look back at the aesthetic principles of the tea gathering. So I think you see a lot of people sort of hearkening back to these ideas and trying to bring them into their own life. But that would be a fun activity to ask your students. And we'll get into a similar activity that could build off that. Great. Charlotte?
I've just provided a list here of the different components because at this part in the activity, your students, or we even doing it ourselves, might have missed some of the elements. So I just wonder, Karen, if you want to walk us through the different elements and just point out anything that we should know about any of these components.
Great. Thanks, Charlotte. So the Tokonoma, let's start with that one. It's sort of the second category. Many of you observed that there would be that there was a painting there. So it's usually a hanging scroll of calligraphy, and it would be the focus of conversation, maybe a poem, or, you know, it could be something playful and fun. It wasn't necessarily always serious, or a nice painting having to do with the season, but very often it was some poetry that would have been the focus of discussion. Also, there's a small incense container and flowers that would have been designed, and it wouldn't have been the very controlled Ikebana style. Rather, it would be sort of very natural and loose, and sort of showing the power of nature over man. Some of the implements that you observed, there were jars. There's a freshwater jar and a wastewater jar, a kettle for heating, and a ceramic bowl. And some of the, we didn't zoom in too closely on tea bowls. We have many beautiful tea bowls in our collection, but this idea of sort of imperfection and sort of whimsy would have been valued, as opposed to a very perfect control, highly decorated tea bowl. It might just be, you know, monochromatic or something very simple. And as you received your bowl of tea, you would turn it 3 times and always make sure what you thought was the most beautiful part of the bowl was facing your guest or your host. And so this idea of turning the bowl and admiring the bowl and honoring your guests by giving them the most beautiful viewpoint is a part of the gathering. Also, all the utensils, the bamboo water ladle and scoop and stand, those are often made by tea practitioners too. They learn not only how to make their own bowls, but how to make their own utensils. And these, we have some video on our website that talks about the tea gathering and shows an artist today who still is very busy making tea scoops and ladles for tea practitioners. So it's very much imbued as part of with the spirit of the gathering as well. Oh, Sarah, sorry you were kicked out.
So I wanted to address some of the meaning behind all of these elements of the tea house, but also of the gathering itself. And so if we can have a brainstorm, do a brainstorm together, and let's use these circles here to think about the values that are at the core of this tea practice, and think about what kind of relationships are being built in this kind of environment, what kind of environment is created in this tea gathering. So some of you have already addressed some of this in the previous exercise, but if you could use your text tool and just think about what might be some of the values at the core of this tea gathering, and also what kind of environment and relationships are created. So we have tradition and ritual as a value, simplicity, a relationship of community, peace, appreciation of beauty, and maybe that's presentness. Oh, there we go. A relationship of respect, a tranquil environment, which is also simple and clean, natural environment. Yes, this is getting to it. So this might be a way with your students to tease out these values that are at core of this gathering, because we're going to move into an activity that is going to now try and apply these values to the students' lives. So we have serene environment, we have a relationship of harmony. Great. Any last additions? Okay, I'll move us on then. So in this activity, we're going to move to sharing, we're going to create a gathering in our own lives. This is what the activity is for you to do with your students. But first to start thinking, well, what kinds of gatherings might happen in our own lives? Or what kinds of foods or customs help define us, our culture, and our family? So this might be a place where just you brainstorm with your students. You know, maybe the tea ceremony is something that resonates, or maybe it doesn't. But just to start thinking about, well, what in your life might connect to this in some way? So if people would like to share what might be similar gatherings that exist in your own lives, or maybe they don't. So just share in what way you might resonate with the tea gathering in your own life. And I see some people are having problems getting kicked out, so that's fine. Just sign back in when you can. So I'll give an example from my own life. Part of my family lives in Istanbul, Turkey, and we drink a lot of tea, black tea. And whenever you arrive at someone's house, you are served tea in these little glasses that are shaped like an hourglass. And that's very sugary and very caffeinated. And it is definitely, I can relate to the Japanese tea gathering in the value of community, or the environment of community that is built with our tea time. So I'm wondering if anybody else has something similar that you would like to share. Oh, we're having Helena. She can't see anything on her screen. Oh dear. Not sure why. Is anybody else having that problem? Let us know. I'll move on to a different screen, Helena, and see if that it's this just a slide that's giving you the problem. You only need to click video to show yourself. So you should not have that problem. Video should not be causing that problem, the fact that you don't have the button selected. So Bronya is sharing that her grandmother always brought the same Jell-O salad to Thanksgiving. I was in college before I realized that it wasn't quite as traditional and omnipresent as turkey, but we still make sure that we have it. So when the students are sharing their different cultural and family traditions, you can point out those distinctions that Bronya just brought up, that something like the Jell-O salad was a family tradition, and how that may have been different from other families' celebration of the same holiday. So looking for the differences in how different people and different families celebrate shared traditions. Audrey is relating to my story about Istanbul, and she loved being greeted by the tea when you visited a person or shop, a lovely, refreshing custom. Yes, one of the values that I would add is that of hospitality that tea often carries with it. Thank you, Audrey. And Kate shares, every time my grandmother has company, she bakes biscotti. It's lovely. And in Ireland, we have similar culture around tea, says Audrey, a colder climate for different reasons, but the kettle is always on. Colleen shares that when she was in the Peace Corps in Morocco, we would often drink mint tea and talk for a long time. Didn't really have this sort of ritual in my family unless you would consider eating in front of the TV a ritual. I think many of my students could relate to this upbringing. That's great. Yeah, thinking about television as a ritual, I think is very appropriate. It is one of our contemporary rituals, watching television together. And maybe to engage in a conversation with students about how watching television by yourself might be different from watching television with others. How might it be more of a shared ritual in that case when you can have conversation and comments and possibly food and tea around it? So I think bringing in those very real contemporary examples is very important. Sarah, sitting without distraction to talk will be unusual for your students. Yes, so we just right now in our little group, we see how we have this big range of cultural influences and backgrounds and ways of relating to the Japanese tea ritual. Kendra shares that in her neighborhood, we have the ritual of wine on the porch, gather, sit for whatever time we have, and visit. It even has a name, WOTP. I love that. That's great. Well, now we're going to move into the activity that is detailed in your accompanying packet. And the activity is called Create Your Own Gathering. And it starts with a collage activity that will help the students visualize their plan. Now, for the purposes of our webinar, we're not going to do the collage, but we will continue to share orally or in the chat box, whatever is best for people, just to share with each other some of our answers to the following questions, which you will give to your students, and you will prompt them to think through thinking about their gathering that they're going to create with as much care and attention to detail as we observed in the Japanese tea gathering. So the answers to these next, it's about a dozen questions, will form a statement, a written statement that will accompany the drawing or collage that your students will make of their imagined gathering. So let's try these on ourselves using the four values from the four values, by the way, that are at the heart of the Japanese tea gathering are harmony, purity, reflection, and Karen, what is the fourth?
Harmony, purity, respect, and tranquility.
Thank you. Yes, so thinking about these four values, which you would share with your students, think about your fantasy gathering, the gathering that you would like to create. based on these values. And so we're gonna share our thoughts on answering these questions. And you can enter in the chat box or feel free to share with us by pressing your talk button. Let's think about these questions, thinking about the care we witnessed in the video, the values behind the tea gathering, and we encourage the students to bring a similar attitude of care and careful thought to the gathering, to bring it a very deliberate sense of purpose. So think about how you would create your own way of preparing, hosting, eating, and drinking in such a way that would mean something in your own life. So go ahead and share you can pick one of these or several of them, and go ahead and share in the chat box or using the talk button. So Bronia tells us she'd like to have her gathering in the morning outdoors, by water or in a tree grove. It'll be good when the students are working on answering these questions to help them think that a gathering in their lives that they're designing should require this attention to detail, thinking of the time of day, where it will be, might be a special life moment that they wish to mark or celebrate. And I'm going to move us through the questions as you are responding in the text box, because we have several more questions to go. Kate says that she would have her gathering in the form of a dinner inside her house on the weekend. And think also about the food and drink preparation, which is a big part of the tea gathering. Will it be with your guests that you prepare the food, like in the tea gathering? Or will you do it ahead of time and have it all ready for them when they arrive? What kind of food and drink will you serve? What implements will you use? And what is the significance of the items you choose? So as you're answering, feel free to answer to one or any of these. Sarah says she'll have her gathering at a rustic cabin with no distractions. To sit outside and observe what we see, smell, hear, feel, and to invite her immediate family. Colleen's going to gather with girlfriends to laugh and chat outside at a friend's house, preparing tapas together to allow for the passing of plates and the sharing of recipes. Great. So these are also ways to reflect on how the preparing of the food also is important together in the gathering, how you share the process. Great, I'm going to move us to the next slide for the 4 more questions. In thinking about the environment, some of you have already spoken to temperature and lighting and sounds and where you will sit, eat, and drink, what materials will surround you, and what might be the name of your gathering if you choose to name it. So many people do put this much time and care into their gatherings. You can see it sometimes in invitations, you can see it in the ways that we are gathered to any kind of gathering. So, and others don't. Others are much less formal or maybe it's more spontaneous. So these are all different ways to get the students thinking carefully about the gathering that they're creating, and as they're building a visual representation of it in their collage. We have Kate saying that she'll cook the food with her guests so that she's able to share the whole process of the dinner and not just the eating. Cooking mainly Italian food, pasta, eggplant, parmesan, because these are the foods that remind her of her childhood and are some of her favorites for that reason. So the link to history, memory, family, culture, environment, sharing of community, process, these are all things that we want to bring out in the discussion with our students. Thank you all for sharing in that activity. I wish we had time to do a collage because I would love to see what beautiful collages you come up with. But with your students, you will hopefully have a chance to do that. So in our thinking at Global Savvy, World Savvy about global competencies, we have something we call knowledge to action, taking what we've learned and putting it in the world in an active way. So one way that you could take this this activity further is to actually have them plan and carry out the actual gathering over the next week, or do something at their house. And of course, sometimes this might mean they might have to tailor down their expectations or their big plans to something much more simple. So the knowledge to action piece of this activity could also be about simplification. So the questions that the participants developed in the earlier discussion can help them track and note what worked and what didn't work. And then come back into the classroom and have the real world gathering report back. And ask the questions of, well, how did your gathering include or not include the values from the Japanese art of tea? How was your gathering different? What other values did you include? And how were you blending the new ideas with old traditions, which was the example that one of you gave with the Jell-O at Thanksgiving. That might be a blending of different traditions, of old and new. So in our last few minutes here, I just would like us to reflect together in closing. Here are 4 questions that you can just choose one, and you can put the number of the question that you choose to answer in the chat box and answer it. But just these are ways for us to reflect on the ways that we can create shared opportunities for slowing down and sharing with others, to reflect on how we live values of harmony, tranquility, purity, and respect, and to think about who creates those gatherings in our lives, and where in our culture, where in our busy lives are these gatherings held and supported. So these are just some questions that I'd like us to think about in closing. And please just include the number of the question that you're responding to in the chat box. And you can also respond using the talk button. So Sarah responds that the people who create the gatherings in her life are her parents and elders. It's a nice question for students, she says. Who creates gatherings in your group of friends, and how do they become a leader? That's a wonderful way to think about leadership, is it's the people who gather us. That could lead to a very interesting discussion about questioning leadership. Thank you, Sarah. Anyone else have any closing reflections? I can see people typing. All right, we have Bronya answering number 1. I think the staff at my school would really appreciate some shared opportunities for slowing down. That wasn't what I was thinking about when I started the seminar, but now I'm thinking along 2 different lines, I guess. Yes, I think all of us need to slow down. Kate says one way we can create shared opportunities for slowing down is by creating our own person or family ritual and intentionally scheduling time for it each week, even if it's only for an hour. I know some families eat dinner together one certain night of the week. Yes, I think that intentionality of making a ritual is really important. Thank you, Kate. Colleen is agreeing with Sarah, saying, I was thinking the same thing about our students. As a teacher, I find it important to demonstrate life values in a classroom. Totally agree, Colleen. I teach adults in a bachelor completion program here in San Francisco, and we do create rituals for the group decides what they are, and they can be as simple as, a daily, some people call it like an altar or some sort of piece in the middle of the room where people contribute. It could be food, it could be symbolic items. Often the group just creates their own ritual, their own way of coming together and showing community. So that's beautiful. Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to move forward to just our, very quickly, because we're at the end of our time. I just would like to hear from you one thing that you're taking from this webinar today or how you plan to apply it to your classroom teaching as a way of saying goodbye. And thanking you all so much for your contributions and for accompanying us on this webinar. Ron says that he thinks in the modern world, yoga or working out provides opportunities for purity. That's very interesting. Kendra says the generational issue, responsibility for creating gatherings, seems to be passed from one generation to another. When do we take on the responsibility? That is a great question. And I imagine in different cultures and different families and different people, it varies. But that's a great question to bring up with students. When will they take responsibility for taking on these gatherings? Audrey says, sometimes we need to invite the slowing down by starting with a walk in silence before we then sit down and try to quiet our clamoring thoughts, like a training in consciousness. Yes, I do silent noticing walks with my students. Thank you, Bronya. That's a good reminder. Or that was, that was Audrey. Bronya is going to assign reflection number 2 to our students. Very interested in seeing what they see as their ways of living those values. Sharing the answers will also help me think of new ideas. Sarah likes the Seasick Wonder graphic organizer. Great. Glad that was useful. Audrey loved that I only revealed 4 questions at a time for students to respond to or reflect on, so they don't have a sense of rushing through their responses. Thanks, Audrey. That's interesting. I have to say that I felt like I was cramming it in for the webinar. I even thought 4 was too much at a time. So I might in the future, with more leisure, even think of doing less at a time. Sometimes you can only absorb 2 questions at a time. So you can try that out with your students and see what works. I tend to think less is more, but today I had to just pack it all in. But thanks for that feedback. It's good to read. Kendra's not sure yet, but you see real possibilities for your students in imagining their own rituals. You can take these ideas in all sorts of directions, and in the packet, I have really detailed the activity with lots of possible directions to take it in, including directions in ecology and health, globalization. So there's many places to take the art of tea. It's quite a flexible, it's a rich topic. Kate will be implementing the strategy to have students come up with an example of a food ritual in their own family that might be similar to the Japanese tea ceremony. Great. I'm so excited to see, well, I hope you will share back with us by email or in any way what you do with your students. It would be great to know. Colleen teaches pottery and we make tea bowls, but we never had a tea ceremony. So maybe come and visit the museum to experience the ceremony. Definitely get in touch with Karen about that because they do it 5 times a year, so that would be fantastic. Ron says this lesson plan would be of interest for an Asian cooking and culture class that you teach. Fantastic. Great. Bronia will assign the Create Your Own Gathering project. Yay! So many connections with all our standards and learning objectives. Going to share it with my team too. And you're going to look into Project Zero and World Savvy. Yes, please do. Great. Well, I am very excited to hear of all your plans. I want to thank you all so much for participating. This is a really dynamic group, and it made it really fun for me. So thank you all, and see you at the museum or in, who knows, other webinars in the future. Thanks so much, everybody.